Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Waldo, and in this video I am excited to introduce my next project, a 2005 Land Rover LR3 that I found at auction. I'm strongly considering doing a diesel swap, so this should be interesting. I'll create a playlist for this entire build series and I'll link to it in the description. If you're watching this video after it's been out for a while, good news, break out the popcorn and you can binge watch the whole series. This is my 2005 Land Rover LR3. As an auction find, it does have some issues. The goal is to end up with a comfortable vehicle for cross-country road trips that also has some off-road capability for exploring remote places. Throughout this project series, we'll be fixing it up and hopefully swapping in a diesel engine for reliability and efficiency on our adventures. Now, before I introduce the vehicle in detail, let's get to the elephant in the room. And that would be the transmission. The vehicle was listed as having a bad transmission that only moves in reverse. That's right, towards the end of the video, we're going to look into this issue and try to figure out if I need to rebuild the transmission or if it's a simple fix. The Land Rover brand was originally owned by the Rover Company in England. Over the years, it was owned by British Leyland, BMW, Ford, and today it's owned by Tata Motors of India. This particular model was made during the Ford era. Underneath the hood is a Jaguar 4.4-liter V8, or as they would say in England, a Jaguar 4.4-liter V8. Now this engine is actually known to be fairly reliable, which is a departure for Land Rover because the previous V8 gasoline engine that they used was the Rover V8, a famous engine that, well, had its issues here and there. Now this engine has a more than adequate 300 horsepower and makes 315 foot-pounds of torque. Interestingly, in Europe, though it didn't make it to the States, a 2.7-liter V6 diesel engine was available, making 195 horsepower. Now the interior, it's a little bit dirty, it's got a little bit of wear and tear, but it's really not in bad shape. It's got bells and whistles like heated seats front and rear, it's got a heated windshield, dual zone climate control. Down here is the Land Rover Terrain Response System, which lets you set the four-wheel drive system to various different conditions. You can do high range, low range, you can set it for snow or sand or rock crawl, stuff like that. You can also adjust the height of the air suspension, and it even has a hill descent mode. Now being that this is the SE trim and not the HSE, which is the top of the line, this does not have the factory navigation unit. But that's okay, because honestly a 15-year-old navigation unit probably wouldn't be very useful today. Instead, you get a big cubby right here where the navigation screen would go. There's a cubby right here, there's another one over there which is probably not on camera. There are two glove boxes here, tons of cup holders, more storage down here. There's no shortage of places to put things. This vehicle also has 3 sunroofs. You can see one right here, there's one back there in the middle, and then there's another one all the way in the back. And if you don't want the sun shining down on you, you can close this, which extends a mesh net so that it'll block some of the sun at least. There is no way to fully close this to block all of the sun, however. The vehicle even came with an Olive Garden gift card that still has its full balance. This particular vehicle does have the high-end Harman Kardon sound system. I haven't tried it yet to see how it sounds, but I don't have very high hopes because it's a 15-year-old sound system with 15-year-old speakers, so it may not sound very good. Being from the mid-2000s, this does have a CD player, and it has a built-in telephone, I guess. It's got like a telephone pad here so you can dial numbers. It's pretty old-fashioned, and at this point, it's totally useless. One thing that makes the LR3 pretty neat is this split folding rear hatch and tailgate arrangement. The top hatch opens like this, and then with the press of a button, you have a tailgate that you can sit on. The gas struts on this don't quite hold it up, so I will need to replace those. Hopefully they're cheap, they usually are. This vehicle works pretty well for tailgating also. The top of the hatch shields you from the sun and rain. The third row of seating folds flat to give you a very large storage space back here. Let's start by taking a look at some of the issues that this vehicle has, starting with the most obvious from the outside. There's some body damage on the fender and the door. Now I'm hopeful that since these are probably easy to remove, I should be able to go to a junkyard, get a new fender in the door, and just bolt them on, and that should resolve this. I did a little bit of research, and it seems like these vehicles are actually plentiful in junkyards. Now, if you look at this vehicle from the side, you can see that the front is much lower than the rear is. You can see there's a huge gap in between the top of the wheel well and the tire here, whereas on the front, there's a much smaller gap. Not only that, there's supposed to be a piece of trim here, so the gap may even be smaller than it appears. This vehicle does have air suspension, so I think it's very likely there's some sort of issue with that. So I don't know if it needs new airbags or maybe some new valves, but I'll have to look into that. Vehicles with air suspension often do have somewhat of a bad reputation, but the fact of the matter is that airbags do go bad and eventually they will need to be replaced, and there are other components to the system like air compressors and stuff that could also go bad. It's really not that complex of a system, so I really hope it won't be that expensive or hard to repair. Now, the only work that I have done on this vehicle so far is I replaced the battery. And I did that because the battery that in it was totally dead. This vehicle seems like it had been sitting for a little while and the battery read 0.06 volts. All right, so let's start this thing up and see what happens. Starts right up. It says transmission fault. Driver's door open. Yep, the thing sort of lights up like a Christmas tree. Bonnet open. HDC fault. That's hill descent control. Low coolant level. And it's 32 degrees outside. There's another issue. Just too darn cold. Looks like we also have a brake light on. I see an airbag light. I don't have my seatbelt on, so that's why that light's on. The orange light down there looks like a traction control light. I did notice that the brake pedal feels pretty smushy, so that's probably why the brake light is on. So I went ahead and ordered a Land Rover specific diagnostic tool, and a rather expensive one at that. But that's really going to help me get into these computers and figure out what's wrong with all these faults. Well, let's see if we can figure out what's wrong with the transmission. So if I can go ahead and put it in reverse, it's beeping at me because there's a parking brake issue. Okay, yeah, we're having a little bit of a parking brake issue here. And we're going to ignore that and see if it works anyway. So we have it in reverse, and let me just point the camera outside. Let off the brake. Oop. Okay, yeah. So it moves in reverse. The parking brake apparently is on, but we'll ignore that. Now, let's see if we can put it in drive. So we got neutral. See, when I let go, it goes back into neutral. And it doesn't actually, so the D is lit up, but it doesn't actually stay in drive. So I'm wondering if maybe there's an issue with the shift linkage. The first order of business is to get this thing up on jack stands. And with that, we can crawl underneath and take a look at the shift linkage. Heat shield. All right, so here's the shift linkage on the side of the transmission. Based on the wear on this piece of metal here, it looks like the shift linkage pulls this shift lever towards the rear of the vehicle to get drive. So I think what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to pull this out after I loosen this up. I'm going to try to pull this out towards the front of the vehicle, and we'll see if there's any play in this linkage. 21 and a 13 millimeter wrench for this. Okay, there we go. There is a little bit of play in this. There does seem to be more play if I pull it forward, so we'll leave it there and tighten it up. Since it's a German transmission, we're going to use the good and tight torque spec on this nut.
A few moments later.
All right, so that didn't actually fix the issue. So I've got this loosened up again, and we move it back once. It moves into reverse. No, that's neutral actually. Move it back again, that's reverse. Back, it goes pretty easily into drive. And then it does go back one more time, which I think is the drive with the manual shift. So I don't think the transmission is the issue. I think it's this linkage. The linkage is binding up for some reason. So I think the easy thing to do is just to replace it. I guess I'll look it up and see how much it costs.
Several days later.
Well, we are dealing with some significantly extended transit times for packages, but alas, it is here. This new shift linkage, it appears to be a genuine Land Rover part, so let's get this thing installed. All right, so I have the new linkage here. I have it installed on the shifter, so I just gotta snake this thing through. This white plastic piece here has a rubber seal on it, so that's what seals up this hole here. This thing needs to be rotated counterclockwise, or anti-clockwise, as they would say in Britain, to tighten it up. So I got the other end of the linkage all hooked up, so let's just see if this is going to go into drive. Yeah, so it goes through all the gears easily. So the final test will be to make sure it still works once the car is running, because that could change things. I took all this apart, brought it into the house, cleaned it up. It was disgusting, but it's looking pretty good now. This thing's going to be like a new vehicle by the time I'm done with it. Now, before we start it up and test it out, I need your help in coming up with a name for this vehicle. Now, I name all of my vehicles, and I usually use names that would be suitable as a first name for a person. For example, my Volkswagen Golf is named Margot. The GMC truck that we're doing the come and swap in, I haven't actually ever used his name on the channel before, but his name is Billy Bob. Now, for this vehicle, I had a few names in mind. I was thinking maybe Nancy, Hilda, or Wanda. I tend to like names that are not currently popular as baby names, and all three of those names fit into that category. Here in the US, Nancy was a popular name back in the 40s and 50s, so for that reason, we do still have quite a few 70 and 80-year-old women who have that name. However, it's very unlikely to become a popular baby name anytime soon because here in the US, we have a very prominent politician named Nancy who is very unpopular. Heck, look at how the popularity of the name Hillary fell off a cliff when the Clintons got into the White House in early 1993. The name Wanda was never super popular here in the US, although it did have some usage between the 30s and the 60s. The name Hilda was popular around the year 1900, but then declined from there. If you like any of those names, or if you have any ideas of your own, leave me a comment down below. Once I get enough comments, I'll create a poll and you guys can help decide the name of this vehicle. All right, so let's start this thing up and see if it goes into drive. There it is. We are in drive. Well, it looks like that fixed the issue, but now I'm going to try to creep forward and we'll see if this thing actually works. Also keep in mind that the parking brake is jammed on, so I'm not actually going to be able to go very far, but we'll be able to make sure it actually moves. Here we go. Oh, yeah, it works just fine. Also, it doesn't seem like the parking brake is stuck on anymore. Into reverse. Yeah, great. Well, that repair was successful, and it seems more likely that I got a good deal on this. Once my scan tool comes in from Europe, I should be able to dig in further to see what other issues this vehicle has. As for the diesel swap, my current plans are to fix this vehicle up so I can get it on the road and drive it. The clutch is starting to slip on my Volkswagen Golf, which means that this may end up becoming my daily driver until I can get around to doing a clutch replacement on the Golf. I also don't want to start another diesel swap until my GMC come-in swap is complete, and that means I have plenty of time to plan and source an engine for this. I do still have the GM 6.5-liter diesel V8 engine that I removed from Billy Bob, and that might be a good choice for this after I rebuild the engine. As for the transmission, I do think it's probably a good idea to keep the ZF 6-speed automatic transmission that this vehicle currently has, because it is so highly integrated with the vehicle and the terrain response system. It is, of course, always tempting to swap in a manual transmission though. Because this vehicle is so highly computerized, I do think the swap will end up requiring quite a bit of computer-related modification. But as a computer engineer, this is my specialty, so we could end up with a uniquely well-integrated swap. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to comment down below if you have any naming ideas or suggestions for diesel engines to swap in.